Okay, and now it's time for our weekend recap. We're going to kick it off with a title fight, world title fight that took place in Argentina between the then reigning champion, newly crowned, Demarco, and the challenger, Gabriela Celeste Alanis.
The prediction stuck. Alanis won the fight.
In the fashion I predicted earlier this week, the fashion I expected. Try and understand. Tamara Demarco, the reigning champion, going into this fight, she won that title from Deborah Ana E. Lopez. Deborah Ana E. Lopez, who's a finesse-fighting kind of fighter.
Pure boxer, stick and move, outside jabber.
Completely defensively minded kind of fighter. The kind of fighter that is already economic, thus
easier to outwork.
And that's not the kind of fighter that Tamara Demarco had in front of her last night in Argentina. In Celeste Alanis,
you're essentially facing the exact opposite of what you faced in Deborah Lopez.
What Deborah Lopez was, a defensively responsible outside kind of fighter, Gabriela Alanis is the exact opposite. She wants to get mid-range to inside on you. She wants to hurt you.
She's not going to spend the fight circling away on the perimeter of the ring.
Moving laterally. No, she's going to move into you and pour it on.
She knocked down Tamara Demarco 2 times in the first round.
Tamara Demarco somehow, someway survived that early scare in the early goings of the fight, but you could see
she's outgunned.
She is being thoroughly outfought. Maybe Tamara Demarco had enough in the toolbox that she can outfight and she can outwork a characteristically economic fighter in Deborah Ana E. Lopez, but when she found herself so confronted
with a mean-spirited puncher,
well, that's when reality set in. Tamara Demarco managed to survive for 7 rounds in this thing before her own corner, decided to call it a day, throw in the towel.
They made the right decision because she was getting
blasted with hard shots in between the punches as both fighters traded blows.
Gabriela obviously got the better of those exchanges.
Gabriela Celeste Alanis, this division's newly crowned WBO champion.
I don't imagine anybody's going to be in any kind of hurry to take that WBO title away from her.
In the women's flyweight division, there are currently 3 active reigning world champions. Marlena Esparza, unified WBC and WBA champion Marlena Esparza of America. You have Leonela Paula Yudica of Argentina.
She's got the IBF, and Gabriela Alanis, now she's got the WBO.
So if you're Marlena Esparza and you have aspirations of unifying more titles in your weight class in order to eventually become your division's undisputed champion, Leonela Paula Yudica would be the safer choice, the safer way to go. Right now,
yeah, maybe Marlena Esparza is a unified champion.
As far as ranked standings go, maybe that makes her the #1 flyweight in the world. Or maybe it's Leonela Paula Yudica, this division's longest reigning champion, that has reigned as this division's IBF champion since 2014.
It's 8 years.
As far as record keeping goes, maybe you can rank either Marlene or Leonela Paula Yudica as the #1 flyweight in the world. But if you ask me, the most dangerous fighter in today's flyweight division, it's not them. It's Gabriela Alanis.
Right now it is. Neither one of them have the punching power to keep her off.
Sporting a professional record of 13 wins, no losses, no draws, with 5 knockouts. The newly crowned WBO champion in the flyweight division. If you ask me, that's the most dangerous fight in the weight class right now.
The prediction stuck. She battered Demarco the way I said she would batter Demarco.
Congratulations to her. Flyweight division now has a newly crowned champion and a force to be reckoned with. We then come to yesterday's light heavyweight unification match between the 2 champions, Artur Beterbiev and Joe Smith Jr. And the fight
ahead of this thing, nobody thought it would go the distance, and it didn't.
Regardless of who you picked, whether you picked Artur Beterbiev or Joe Smith Jr., most were expecting this fight to end in a knockout, and it did, though I don't think most were expecting it would end so abruptly, so quickly. Just 2 rounds into this thing, Artur Beterbiev dispatched a very game, albeit
Joe was out of his depth.
And it's not because Joe's a mug, it's not because Joe's a bad fighter, it's not because Joe isn't a tough guy or he isn't durable. He's all of those things, but Artur Beterbiev,
sometimes tough ain't enough.
Joe Smith Jr. came out hard and fast behind the lead hand, and it was working for him 2 minutes into the first round.
Pressing forward and using the jab.
The fight didn't last very long, you understand, so it might go over people's heads that it wasn't Artur barreling forward, mowing down Joe Smith Jr. Quite the opposite. Artur elected to box, elected to sharpshoot as Joe Smith Jr. advanced behind his lead hand, behind his jab. The jab which he countered with a chopping overhand right.
Remember what I told you guys about Joe having long arms?
That he's a bigger, longer guy that throws wider punches than Artur Beterbiev. Artur Beterbiev throws the kind of shots that are so short and so sharp, they're very hard to counter.
Whereas Joe's shots, they're wider. He leaves his arm out there a little longer.
He started off all right in the first round, pressing forward, behind the jab, behind the lead hand, but it didn't take Artur Beterbiev that long to come over the top of that jab with a counter right hand that visibly hurt Joe Smith Jr. And the aesthetic of the match...
Joe wasn't letting his hands go as much after that.
As stated, what stood out to me is that it wasn't Artur Beterbiev putting a squeeze on Joe. It wasn't Artur barreling forward and applying pressure. Artur elected to sharpshoot. Artur elected to move and punch. Artur elected to box.
Pick his punches, pick his shots.
The first 2 minutes of the fight, you have a very spirited Joe Smith Jr. attempting to put the squeeze on Artur Beterbiev. And everything changed after that counter right hand over the top that countered Joe Smith Jr.'s jab. The last minute of the first round,
everything changed. Artur scored a knockdown.
There was a slip beforehand that looked a lot like a knockdown, but referee Harvey Dock, he decided to rule it a slip. And before the first round was over, Artur scored an official knockdown, the first of this fight, the first recorded knockdown. You could see that Joe was in trouble.
And it goes back to what I told you. Joe's shots are just too wide for Artur Beterbiev.
Shots just too wide. He leaves his arm out there too long. Long enough that something might come back at him. Some return fire from what is the more heavy-handed guy, the more heavy-handed puncher. Artur Beterbiev is more efficient than he's given credit for. He's known for his power, his destructive.
He's a two-handed puncher, and that's what he's known for.
But he's more than just a heavy-handed guy. You'll notice that Artur Beterbiev doesn't load up on his shots. He doesn't
have to. He shoots from the hip.
And because he shoots from the hip, his punches are short. They don't have to travel very far to meet the target.
That's not saying that Artur Beterbiev's got the fastest hands in the division.
So much as his punch placement is so well executed, it can actually give off the appearance of speed.
Because he doesn't load up on his shots. The punches just flow.
Artur Beterbiev, unlike Joe Smith Jr., he doesn't need all that much room to work, and he doesn't need all that much space to generate concussive power, devastating power within close quarters.
Hooks around the guard or uppercuts that split it.
Generates devastating power within close quarters, mid-range to inside, deep in the pocket, very deep in the pocket. And that is a unique characteristic. Most other guys, they're going to need a little bit of room, a little bit of real estate to really drive their shots, whereas Artur can be right up on the guy in that phone booth and generate enough power.
Most other guys can't generate that kind of power that close to the other guy, but Artur can.
He scored 2 more knockdowns in the second round.
And I'll tell you what, this post-fight recap is going to end up lasting longer than the goddamn fight did.
I went with Artur Beterbiev to win the fight and win the fight by way of knockout, though I didn't anticipate that it would only last 2 rounds. Just 2 rounds. Try and understand. Joe Smith Jr. is a characteristically tough out and a durable guy that can take some punishment, can take some shots. For Artur Beterbiev to so quickly hurt him and so quickly dispatch him, well...
How the hell are you supposed to deal with a guy like this?
It's going to be an interesting couple of weeks on the heels of Artur Beterbiev's latest knockout, because Artur has told reporters that he wants the undisputed WBA, WBC, IBF, and WBO light heavyweight world title fight with Dimitri Bivol next. He was quoted as saying, "They talk always like they want to fight next." Okay, let's do it. It's going to be interesting, it is, because Artur wants to pursue the undisputed title fight, whereas what Bob Arum and Frank Warren want, they want Artur to go to London. They want him to face Anthony Yarde next.
Bob Arum has revealed that Artur Beterbiev versus Anthony Yarde is a done deal.
Well, did anybody tell Artur that it's a done deal? Set to take place in October in London for the WBC, IBF, and WBO light heavyweight world titles.
Anthony Yarde was actually in attendance for this fight.
He was there in New York City ringside, and he was quoted as saying, "I think it's going to be a very, very exciting fight. I look forward to it a lot. This is what I'm in the sport for. Beterbiev is a hard hitter, and I hit hard too."
But Anthony doesn't come from the same amateur background as Artur Beterbiev, which goes back to what I told you.
Artur Beterbiev is more than just a heavy-handed guy. He's more than just a two-handed puncher. In this fight, what might be going over people's heads is that what led to the knockout was punch picking, punch selection.
It wasn't just brute force, even though that's how a lot of people are going to remember it.
Artur Beterbiev elected to box, you understand. At the start, it was Joe Smith Jr. putting a squeeze on Artur. It was Joe Smith Jr. attempting to apply pressure. Pressure that backfired, but better still. Artur won this fight.
He elected to box and work off the counter.
And while that doesn't make him an, according to Hoyle, boxer puncher or a counter puncher, he has that in his toolbox. He has that in his repertoire. Being honest, I don't like Anthony Yarde's chances against Artur any more than I liked Joe Smith Jr.'s chances against Artur.
I don't think Beterbiev versus Yarde is a bad fight, but I do think it's a formality.
I do feel in my heart of hearts that it's a fight that can wait. It's not necessary. Not right now. Artur Beterbiev is 37 years old. He's not getting any younger. He ain't got time to be waltzing around with Anthony Yarde in a fight we all know he can win. He needs to shoot for undisputed, and he wants to. The question is, will Bob Arum and Frank Warren stand in the way? Because it very much appears
Artur Beterbiev wants undisputed. They want him to fight Anthony Yarde.
What is it that you out there want to see? Dmitry Bivol himself stated ahead of this weekend's fight that he's very much interested in the winner, especially if the winner ends up being Artur Beterbiev, which we all know it did. We like both of these fighters, Beterbiev and Smith, very much. Bivol would be extremely interested in having a fight against the winner of this bout, especially if the winner is Artur Beterbiev. The fight between Bivol and Beterbiev is a long-awaited dream of boxing fans, Ryabinski said. Top-ranked President Todd Dubove, who promotes Beterbiev, likes the idea of a match with Bivol. However, he cautions there may be several options in play, like WBO mandatory challenger Anthony Yarde, who we just talked about, who I think personally, he gets knocked out by Artur the same as Joe.
Mandatory or no mandatory, it's just a formality.
But if Anthony Yarde is smart, he should remain open-minded to any potential step-aside offers that he might receive, so that should he step aside and allow Artur to fight Dmitry, he can end up fighting for all the belts instead of just the 3 Artur is currently holding. We've, over the years, had conversations about Bivol and Beterbiev fighting. When things during COVID kind of locked up and everything was in paralysis, it didn't go very far, Dubove told Sky Sports. I think that pot has gotten bigger as a result of the emergence of Bivol, who came from nowhere with big upset. I think that division obviously got a big boost when Bivol upset Canelo, but there will be plenty of options for the winner of this fight. You have a guy, Anthony Yarde, from your neck of the woods in the UK, that is a mandatory challenger for the WBO title, so he's going to be thrown into the mix. Bivol is in the mix, obviously, and you got guys like Gilberto Ramirez and things like that. I think there's really a lot of matches in that division right now.
Todd Dubove seemed more open to a Bivol versus Beterbiev fight than Bob.
Bob explained why Dmitry Bivol is not an option for the winner of Beterbiev versus Smith.
You know, these old guys, they don't beat around the bush.
Remember, I'm a little salty what Ring Magazine or anyone says when it comes to putting guys in number 1 and number 2. Who cares?
Bob Arum told Frank Warren's Queensberry Promotions when told that Ring Magazine had Dmitry Bivol rated as the number 1 boxer at 175 pounds in their rankings.
In the end, I'd hope it'd be decided in the ring, right?
Arum continued on the issue of who is number 1 at light heavyweight, Bivol or Beterbiev.
Finally, Bivol will have a chance to fight the unified champion who has 3 belts, and he has 1. If not, it's not. You know, again, Bivol can hold a WBA belt, but he is hardly attractive. The Canelo versus Bivol war dies. Canelo was probably the biggest draw in the United States at the box office, and that fight went horribly from a gate-to-gate point of view and from a pay-per-view standpoint because nobody knew about Bivol.
Yeah, ahead of the fight, a lot of people weren't familiar with Dmitry Bivol, but we're not ahead of the fight. It's after the fight. After he beat Canelo Alvarez, I'm pretty sure a lot of people know who he is now.
You understand that if a fighter fights, I call it the dark zone. Nobody's watching, and besides, there's nothing to support it because if they fight on ESPN or if Heyman's guys fight on Showtime, there's at least one megaphone calling about the war, the Warriors. Oh, the zone. Nobody buys. Nobody subscribes to the zone. It's dead zone, as I said to Haney when I signed with Haney and he went to Australia to fight George, which we showed on ESPN. Welcome to sunlight. You fought in dark zone. I think the problem is similar in the UK.
And I think Bob Arum's exaggerating. Put simply, I think Bob Arum's full of shit. The last 4 years, some of the very biggest fights in the sport of boxing have happened on the DAZN platform. Anthony Joshua's big upset loss to Andy Ruiz. You're telling me nobody knew about that. Nobody talked about it. You're telling me that the rematch, which ended up being even bigger than the first fight, nobody knew about that either.
Nobody watched Teofimo's big upset loss to George Kambosos.
Well, you could have fooled me how many people were talking about it on Sunday morning. You're telling me more recently that nobody knew about the Katie Taylor versus Amandia Serrano fight, even though it's sold out Madison Square Garden. You're trying to convince people that the DAZN platform is unable to draw eyes to its fights and to its fighters, yet they've been staging some of the biggest fights in the sport of boxing. Two very big ones are set to go down this year.
Last year, when Canelo Alvarez fought Billy Joe Saunders, you're saying nobody knew about that fight.
And why the hell did 73,000 people show up this year when he fought Dimitri Bivol? You're saying nobody knew about that fight. Then why'd over 600,000 people buy the pay-per-view?
What fights is Bob Arum top-ranking ESPN staging that are drawing that many eyes to their fights?
I ain't just talking about good fights, your run-of-the-mill good fights. There's a lot of good fights happening on a lot of different platforms. What fights on that scale, fights that size, the size of Canelo versus Bivol 1, the size of Canelo versus Golovkin 3, which is coming up?
What fights are either Bob Arum or Frank Warren staging on that scale that are that size?
You know what it is? He's teaming up with old fish eyes Frank Warren to try and compete on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean with the DAZN platform. If Bob Arum is saying what he's saying, it's not because he means it. It's because the DAZN platform has proven formidable over time. Put simply, it's because DAZN is a threat. And it's not just a threat to him in America, it's a threat to Frank in the UK.
How many people would watch if a battle was on DAZN? Few. Again, very, very hard when you have a streaming service where you only have one sport, like boxing. Impossible. There's not enough volume, and it's not worth it.
Yeah, I'd wager Joshua versus Usyk 2, Canelo versus Golovkin 3 are going to draw more eyes and do more business than any of the fights you're doing on ESPN.
But this conversation isn't about them, it's about Bivol versus Beterbiev.
And you can see, Bob Arum doesn't want to do that fight right now. He doesn't. And the longer that fight takes to make, the more it favors the younger, fresher fighter. That fighter is Dimitri Bivol.
Artur wants that fight to happen now. He needs it to happen now.
Bob's getting in the way.